thank you. It's great for me to have a sense of, who's in the room and why, right? I just learned how to pronounce the name of the journal correctly. That's good. I haven't said Audeamus. Audeamus. Is that right? Audeamus?
More or
It's not
less.
consensus. That's very interesting. What else do I know? That it's a great journal. I've been, reading it for some years now. I'm used to seeing it in a little hard copy thing, and just discovered in the last few days that there's this gorgeous digital version. I mean, and gorgeous being, I mean it. It's really nice looking. Yeah. What else do I know? That it's gone. Raymond
Raymond made it gorgeous.
Raymond is the one.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was the design lead for our 10th edition.
Really?
Yeah.
I truly was impressed.
Thank you.
It's really very professional and striking, yeah. As I understand it, it was once an honors rag for UCR, and then at some point it was expanded to be UC, right? Honors UC, and now you've gone national, right? That's incredible. Congratulations. I mean, clearly there's a kind of, ambition and hope driving the operation that I think is quite wonderful. Yeah, yeah. And of course the digital presence, is a big part of what will make that possible. Yeah. While maintaining all of these great professional standards that you already have, right? And as I understand it, everything you do is like peer reviewed, right? Is anything that's published or selected by process of vetting, assessment, discussion. Tell me about that process. How do you, who's in the room, and how do you decide what's going to
I happen to
be
be
in?
here today.
Yeah. Tell me about the decision-making process that goes into it.
Okay, so we have our submission window, so we accept our submissions and then they come in, and as the EIC, I take the submissions, make sure they're blinded, that there's no information, that there's no author names, and then I distribute it to the editorial board. So every submission that we receive is reviewed by 3 different editors, so we kind of have a good range, and then each submission gets reviewed at least 3 times, and then those editors will score those pieces in certain categories. We always score every piece under 3 different general categories, so it kind of covers how original is this piece, because we don't want to publish something that's already been published before, and then also how inappropriate is the piece. We understand for the sake of art, and sometimes there's nudity or language, but we don't want to detract from the overall message of the piece or be really offensive. And then the other general category is engagement. So how interesting is this piece? Is the average honors student or the average reader going to really enjoy reading this piece? And then we have other categories for that specific type of piece. So if it's a creative piece, if it's a poem or something, we're going to grade it differently than an art piece, because there's different standards you want to hold. So there's 4 different categories for those that editors will score them in, and then we will tally up the numbers basically and say, this piece, received what would be equivalent of a C. We don't really want to publish something that, isn't great. We want to look for the top pieces. So after we, tabulate all the numbers and see okay, these are our highest scoring pieces, then we'll move those pieces on to reading day, which is when we kind of, sit down and really review the piece and say, does this piece, is this something really awesome? Do we want to read it again and again? Is it exciting? Do other people want to read it? So it's kind of a full, crazy day when we look at these top scoring pieces and decide, what is really the cream of the crop, what's the best of the best. And then we'll again review and make sure that if it's a research piece, we have to vet it, of course, and make sure that it's okay. And do copy editing, and those kinds of considerations come in after. But so it's kind of like a 2-step process.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic process, and really fair and really considered. Yeah. Wow. Wow. What's the upcoming submission deadline? And there's only one issue a year, right?
Correct. So it's like an annual publication. So I think the submission window is currently open, and I believe it closes on October 8th.
Okay.
Is that correct? Okay.
Okay. So this is a great time to be talking about, how you make, how you assess different kinds of material. That's our purpose today, right? To have a sense of how you do it for music. And as I understand it, you're bringing in different folks to talk about different kinds of submissions, right? All right. I think I know what's going on. Good. Yeah. Last question for you all, at least for this moment. How many of you are brand new to the Audeamus editorial collective? many of you, half the room maybe, something like that, which means the rest of you have been around for a little longer. Yeah, okay, cool. All right. All right, so we want to talk about music, as I understand it, and I think that's just great. And one of the questions is, how and whether you want to include music in the journal. And as I understand it, there's been a move towards, including things that, are rich media, basically. Things that may not necessarily work on the hard copy printed page, right? So you've had video for a little bit, but now you're talking about music, and I say, yes, that's great. I'm so happy to hear that you want to include such materials. I've long admired the ways that Audeamus does, in fact, include not only the scholarly but the creative. I think that's super important. And the fact that there's long been drawings and photographs and poetry and much, much more in the journal very much sets up the possibility of other kinds of creative work, including music. Yay! So, ultimately, it's obviously up to you all to decide what kinds of parameters and guidelines you want to set up for all of this. You are an editorial collective. You are going to make those decisions. I can only make suggestions. And so I'm here to sort of plant some ideas that I hope you'll carry forward in your own internal discussions, in the weeks to come, between now and October, I guess. One thing I would urge you all to do as you open the door to music is to be broad and ecumenical, by which I mean I hope you'll consider all possible different kinds of music, because there's ever so much out there, from popular to classical to jazz to, and on and on and on and on and on and on, right? There's a lot of different kinds of music. So I would urge you not to narrow the channel. Yeah, I realize that raises interesting questions and challenges to how do you assess so many different kinds of things. But that's interesting work, and valuable work, as opposed to narrowing the channel. Yeah. Let me give you a for instance for why this might be important. Have you heard of Sarah Bareilles, the pop singer? Yeah? Yeah. She was an undergrad at UCLA. She graduated I think 2004, 5, 6, something like that, 10-ish years ago. During that period when she was an undergrad, and she was like a communications major, I think, she was playing in coffee houses, right? She was not Sarah Bareilles yet. She was just, an undergrad making her own music with her own guitar, girl with guitar kind of thing, in coffee houses. And, her working up to become the star that she now is was gradual and considered. Everybody starts from somewhere. If Sarah Bareilles sent in, back then in the day, sent you one of her songs for consideration in Audeamus, would you take it, would be a question, Original composition. Her original work was her with her guitar just singing her own stuff, right? Would you be able to talk about whether it was good work or not? Imagine yourself making those decisions. Imagine yourself deciding not to publish her work, and then 10 years later it's like, oh my God, we turned down a Sarah Bareilles song back in the day. Yeah, so think about all of that. And one of the things I'm going to, sort of urge you not to do is to come down to, I like it, I don't like it kind of decisions. I think there's way more interesting ways to make decisions about musical, original musical work. Way more interesting ways. And it's possible to respect something and find something interesting that you may not like, whatever that means. I'm an ethnomusicologist. I listen to a whole lot of different kinds of musics and sounds. There's a lot of stuff I listen to not because I think it's groovy or because it's nice background music while I wash the dishes, but because there's something valuable going on in it that I may not want to listen to at any given moment in the day, but I think is important, right? So you may be faced with similar kinds of situations where you think, I wouldn't choose to listen to that while driving here in my car in the morning, but that's important work, and we would be honored to have it in our journal. So, get right past the I like it, I don't like it thing, right? That's the least of all interesting ways to make decisions about music. I also want to push you away from a belief, an attitude, I'm not sure what to call it. I think in the United States, many of us get brainwashed as children to believe that the only people who really know anything about music are the people who are like trained, with 4-part harmony and stuff like that. And I do not believe that is true. I think that there are absolutely musical specialists out there in the world who have lots of training, and I salute them and I respect them. But I think that the rest of us who listen to music on a daily basis, who many of us, most of us, I know from teaching many undergrads at UCR, I know that you tend to have very diverse musical interests. And this to me means that you know things about music, you know things. You have broad knowledge, you keep up on certain kinds of music. You have a basis from which to make value judgments, as it were. So I'm going to encourage you not to believe that only people with technical musical know-how are the people who can assess music. I don't think that's the case. So yeah. All right, let's get a bit more specific here. It's possible, and I'm not the person to say what's going on here, but it looks to me like there's some possibility that the journal is moving towards something that might be called digital humanities, or a media-rich kind of platform, as opposed to a hard copy, here it is kind of thing, and that's very much in line with what's happening in scholarship right now, moving towards digital, online, and often open access work. This is what's happening in the broad, world of scholarly work and being a critical public intellectual. So it seems to me that Audeamus is already moving in that direction, and I see this as a very promising thing. So given all of this, along the way, and I'm just guessing that it's going to take lots of discussion and step-by-step kinds of decision-making, I'm guessing that the format of the journal may change over time. And again, I don't know, that's up to you all. Right now it looks like a hard copy thing that is gorgeously presented on your computer screen, right? You can even turn the page, as it were, right? And that's fine. I'm wondering if, in the long run, that's going to be the best format. But again, you're going to have to feel your way into this. I also very much recognize that, some of this, if not much of this, comes down to staff time and staff effort and staff resources. So that is part of the picture. Who has the time to do all of the magic work behind the scenes, right? That creates a beautiful issue. Yeah. So I do recognize that, Jade. Right now, what I think I was reading was that you've got the main issue of the journal in any given year, and then you have a thing called a supplement, which is where you're parking the beyond text stuff, like video and so on and so forth. You look puzzled, some of you.
That was kind of like a 1-year thing, and so last year's board, they felt that certain pieces were so excellent, but we just couldn't publish them, and so they kind of created the supplement to that particular journal. But this year's journal, the 10th edition, did not have a supplement.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was like kind of a one-time kind of thing.
One-off. I'm actually, in some ways, happy to hear that.
Yeah.
But in other ways, you're saying it was kind of spillover. There was so much great stuff that.
Yeah, and then there was just logistics that prevented us from including that into the journal for that year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, good for all of you for being resourceful and finding a way to include more than you could have otherwise. My argument here is that I really hope you'll include video, music, the non-textual things in the main journal course. That's where I'm coming from. Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. I am going to ask you again, if you have computers or any internet-connected device, have you looked at the submission guidelines? Are you familiar with them? Because I know many of you are relatively new to the journal. Are you aware that there's 6 categories for submission? Yes. I'm seeing enough nods, so I'm just going to keep going. Well, the categories 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are very straightforward, and then you get to number 6, and that appears to be where music would be, could be, can only be at this point in time. I very much like what I'm seeing under the video media section. Clearly a lot of thought went into that, the different formats, the fact that you can send in everything from dance performances, short plays, short movies, scenes, obviously you're thinking expansively about what video may represent. And you see where I'm going with this. Please think in the same way about music, expansively, right? Expansively. I noticed the formats, MP4, AVI, so on and so forth. You're accepting many formats up to a certain size, again, for video. And you're suggesting that submissions be no longer than 5 minutes in length. I can only imagine how much discussion went into that. But, obviously size and all of that really comes into play when you're dealing with, rich media, with the digital. Things get big really quickly. So for music, I think I would suggest I would exhort you to come up with similar guidelines for music rather than the number 6 other. Yeah, and I also recognize that this means that everybody who does something is going to want their own category, and it gets out of hand real quick. I understand that, but I'm guessing there would be potentially enough music material being submitted that it would be worth your while to provide some clear guidelines, and that will make your work easier and more productive, if you've already sort of set things up so that you can get quality submissions of music. Yeah, that's where my mind is going at this point. Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, the submissions page is very professional, by the way. Yeah. All right. Here's one of my thoughts. For video submissions, you require what's called an artist/director's statement. And I think something similar should be required for music submissions. That would be my suggestion, as opposed to someone just sort of saying, here's my MP3, make of it what you will. Yeah, I would suggest that the composer or writer, creative person who creates the musical piece should send you some kind of explanation about it as well. Yeah, I think that would, again, enable you all as the collective to make intelligent decisions about what it is when you have a sense of where the composer or writer is coming from, right? Because otherwise you could be thinking, well, it's another reggae piece, so what? And perhaps you wouldn't understand that it's, for instance, written as, homage to a particular calypso star who, da-da-da. Maybe there's this whole sort of background to it that you could not be otherwise aware of, for instance. Yeah. Is Raymond's phone buzzing?
So popular, Raymond. Nice.
I do have a question
Yeah.
about that though. So typically we always publish the artist statement alongside the piece.
Good.
That's just kind of like what we've always done.
Good.
Do you recommend the same kind of, publishing a director or artist statement alongside, a video, because we know there's other journals that do similar stuff with digital media and those kinds of things, but sometimes it's just kind of like they host an interview and they talk about the piece, or they provide the content or the lens through which the viewer would read and consider the piece.
Yeah.
So do you think it's more valuable to have the artist statement instead, or should we provide, our discussion?
Can I say both? Yeah, I think there's real value to understanding where the artist, him or herself, is coming from. But you're talking about, interviews and so on and so forth. That can only add interest and value and depth, don't you think? Yeah. I do think it's important to have some sense of where the artist is coming from in his or her own words, as it were. Artist statement, yeah. What have you found to be most effective or useful?
As the current EIC, and also someone who does art, I would love to have an artist statement next to my piece, just because I guess the work I put into pieces is pretty detailed, and I have usually reasons, but for the things I do. So it's good that I would like to have readers kind of see that. But then there's always the issue with quality, because sometimes not everyone, especially undergraduates, are not used to writing artist statements. So sometimes we worry that the way the artist like phrases or like chooses to put words together, sometimes it kind of detracts from the piece, or sometimes it seems a little more confusing, so then we have to copy edit those things, and then it's just it's always a question. And there's other journals that don't do that, that don't publish the artist statement. Sometimes they just put like an artist bio in the back, and don't leave any, they just have the title of the piece. So it's like, there's all kinds of different ways to doing things. And I guess we've always published the artist statement, which is like what I like, of course.
Yeah.
But, we could always change going forward.
Yeah, you've just laid out the issues in a really thoughtful way. Personally, yeah, I also like artist statements. I want to know where that person's coming from. I get the issues around copy editing and sometimes having to recast what's there. And I acknowledge that there's another school of thought, which is that the art should speak for itself. Title, bam, that's it. The rest is up to the viewer to make sense of what's in front of them. I think that's a fairly old school way of thinking about art, actually, as autonomous object that should make sense in its own terms. I'm an anthropologist. I'd rather know where the person's coming from. Yeah, and then make assessments and interpretations once they're so yeah. Some of the things that you could ask people to try to address in artist statement would be things like of course why they wrote it to begin with, what some of their influences are or were, what their process was in writing the piece, because there's many different ways to create any piece of art, including music. How they want anyone to listen to it. There are different ways to receive art, whether it's sound or visual. And again, as an ethnomusicologist, how might this piece of music make a difference in the world? How do they want it potentially to affect people who are listening to it? There's a lot of music in the world that's very much about connecting to community, social justice, all kinds of things like that. Not all music, but a lot of music does. So these are all just potential things that an artist could address in his or her own statement. Yeah, just sort of thinking out loud about things I would always like to know about. Yeah. There's some practical stuff. I would suggest the whole 5-minute kind of, no longer than kind of rubric. MP3s are of course smaller in size than other formats, like WAV or the sound quality is not as great as some other formats, but again, size matters, in these contexts, right? I would say, why don't you talk about whether like a link to a SoundCloud streaming music might be simpler for everybody in the long run? That's worth thinking about. If folks are writing longer works, which if it's coming from like a capstone project or something like that, students could in fact be writing longer wonderful works. You could encourage an excerpt from a longer work rather than a longer thing, something like that. Importantly, I think, and I think probably already do talk about permissions and ownership and all that good stuff, but I think it's essential for composers and songwriters to retain rights to all their own work, right? There's a big bad world out there, and you'd be astonished at the extent to which many musicians lose control over their own material. So is that something that's already written into Audeamus, that
They generally do retain the rights, yeah. But yeah, we could be more explicit about it for the music.
Probably. That's my thought. Like I say, things just keep getting tighter and nastier, and blurred lines, Marvin Gaye's family, things are the legal world around fair use and copyright is for real. Yeah. What are your thoughts at this point? What kinds of questions are on your minds? What kinds of concerns are on your minds? And we have some four great examples of YouTube music that Jane and some of you all, I think, put together. Yeah, which might be useful for us all to look quickly at together to get some issues on the table. But do you have questions, responses, concerns at this point?
Well, major concern I'm coming up with actually has to do with artists that make music by mixing other artists' music. I know there's issues with Brian Burton, Danger Mouse, where he'll mix samples together and people will try to retain their own copyrights. But he tries to show that it is art, that it is a different medium than what they had produced. So what if we get into that gray area? How should we look at the piece, and should we even go through with publishing it at all?
Yeah. Oh man, great question. And, you know, literally the legal scene is changing by the day, right? You know, smaller and smaller, more specific materials can be owned, musically speaking. It's really kind of mind-boggling, and even some musicians are saying at this point, despite the fact that there's this amazing history of musicians being ripped off, you know, work, some are saying, I mean, that this is kind of anti-creative to try and create ownership over, like, you know, single beats kind of thing, you know. I also recognize that remix culture is one of the most happening creative areas in digital music, whether it's hip hop, you know, or other areas, EDM. There's all kinds of places where that kind of ripping, remixing is central to the aesthetic, you know. It does absolutely, though, get you into the area of whether it's within copyright or not. I'm not here to legally advise on that because I simply can't. But I would encourage you to have that discussion. And it would be essential for the artist to make an explicit argument, I think, over how and why that's central to their creative and aesthetic purpose, and possibly social purpose, right? Yeah, that's my thought. Do you have a position on this, Marvin, or what do you think?
My personal position tends to be more towards the artists. I just think that if you are creating your own work, regardless of where its original source is from, it should be interpreted as its own piece. Of course, if it draws way too heavily to the point of just plain plagiarism, like changing the lyrics, that of course goes into more black and white territory. You're just ripping off the music. But if you can take a sound and then change it fundamentally into something which is its own beast, then that's definitely new art.
So, at least partly you're saying it depends, and there's degrees of scale, and, you know, the discussion needs to be had, probably. And I'm glad you want to respect artists, of course. Yeah.
So if that situation does come up, should we explicitly state, like in their abstract, that, like, should we tell them that they need to argue for why they use this person's music in their own music, or is it just,
I would.
I don't know. Okay.
Personally, I would. And that's aside from the legal question of what's permissible under fair use. You know, I want to hear the rationale, personally. Yeah.
So do you think we should put that under just general guidelines, like include that in like the requirements for submissions?
Perhaps, and that immediately opens the door to such work, and I'm not sure to what extent you want to do that, but again, that's up to you. Yeah. Along related matters, if for instance, you get a music example that's actually either audio or video, and there's multiple performers involved, I would just get a simple sort of permissions form, no lawyer required, you know, a simple permissions form where you have permission from all of the performers, you know, on record. I think that's important. Yeah, and that's something you can create yourselves. Again, you don't need an attorney to do that. Yeah. Other questions, other comments, other concerns? We've got, you know, 15 minutes. We got these 4 amazing examples. Thank you for sending those, by the way. And each one raises different issues, which was the idea, right? Could we turn on the projector? I know this is the moment that Raymond was least crazy about, but turn on the projector, pull down the little screen, and we already pulled up the 4 YouTube clips. And I think the first one is a coffee house performer.
You have to press it on the remote.
Yeah, click.
There we go.
Which one would you like to start off with?
Kim, the one on the far
Kim
left.
Dawson.
Her, yeah, her.
Great.
Yeah. Just a few minutes.
he ran and punched me right in my left eye. I said, don't you give a diddle, and I lit his house on fire. He gave all my ass and I was holding his shotgun. I was dressed like Tina Turner and beyond Thunderdome. Said, don't shoot, I said, I don't, I love you, you're my friend. I handed him my blade and shot myself in the head. Then I stuffed a box of tissues in the hole in my skull. I got in my Mazda and I drove to the mall. I got a big Johnson shirt and some silicone tits. When I pulled out the tissues, they were covered in shit. And the beer I had for breakfast was a box of cheap white wine. The boombox on my shoulder was a box of clementines. I ate every single one without noticing the whole. Said your box was
sorry.
rock and roll.
I was getting super into it.
I'm looking at his shoes.
This is my suggestion. That's why. Yeah, she started out as a coffee house performer, but her music ended up on the soundtrack for Juno. Anyone know the Moldy Peaches? So that's her like famous band, but she's kind of back to going to regular stuff. But her stuff sounds very similar to like the anti-folk kind of stuff. So I was like, this might be a submission that we would get because it's someone who's skilled at guitar, but their lyrics are somewhat inappropriate. So it's a lot of issues to consider.
What a fascinating example. I had no idea. I could just tell that she was
I like music a lot. So.
Yeah. Oh my God. How would you all approach this? Where would you begin? I mean, there's a number of interesting things. There's like live footage of it's footage of a live performance. So that's also special about it. Yeah.
So I really like that too, and I realized like, oh my gosh, that sounds just like Juno. And then you said that, and I was like, I knew it. So I think like if we got something like this in, I would really appreciate it, just from my own perspective. And I think that her lyrics, even though they are kind of like inappropriate, maybe to some people and some people not inappropriate, I still think if it's essential to what she's doing, then I think that's how we should look at it. Like, how essential is it to the message that you're trying to convey? And if it's completely irrelevant, then why is it there? But also, like, what could be irrelevant to us might be totally relevant to them. So I think looking at it holistically, like, the thing that they send in, like, their abstract, this is why I'm doing this, and then their visual piece, I think that's really important.
Yeah, okay. Good reasons all. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've never seen Juno, so this is completely new to me, like new sound, like I've never heard of her or seen the movie, but I definitely think like in this case an abstract is super important because I have no idea what this song is like for, what it's about, like why she's putting these lyrics in there. And I think like the first thing we'd have to discuss is her kind of like inappropriate language distracting from her message. Like I don't know, just because I don't even know what the message is from this point, so.
Okay. Let's also assume that each of you would listen to an example probably more than once, in order to really give it its due attention, and you would pick up more as you listen to more than once. Yeah, yeah. One way to go about this would be, if it's not familiar to you, and you're sort of thinking, what's going on here, it would be to ask, like, what bigger body or style of music is it part of? How does it relate to other music you've heard similar to it? And how does it compare? I don't know. What would you call this style of music? Yeah. I don't know about you all. I have a strong sense that she wrote the thing herself that she is singing. So this is the singer-songwriter kind of, acoustic. I don't know what to call it myself. Kind of folk. You know what?
It's anti-folk. So it's supposed to be a genre into itself, but I don't know if we want to go into it.
That's really interesting.
I don't know. It's because it sounds folksy, but it's dealing with a lot of their music. I listen to it a lot. It's kind of like, the angsty teenager stuff, but it's like under with the acoustic guitar, very coffee house, kind of, Tales of Woe kind of thing. So that's very that's why it was appropriate for Juno, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And it's kind of against not maybe against, but it deals with a lot of inappropriate issues. So they talk about drug abuse, all kinds of things that I would say older folk songs don't really cover in such explicit detail.
Right.
And that's why they call it anti-folk. I don't know. It's something you could look up more, I
I'm
guess.
so interested. Wow. Yeah. And so there's a kind of edginess to it, right? Which is I think right out there. Yeah, in a really interesting and purposeful way. Yeah. It's a really interesting example. Thanks for sharing that one. Yeah. Let's take a 45-second look at the second example, if you don't mind. Try and keep this moving.
child in my life? Will I make a difference in my death? Will I be missed? Will I be granted some sort of afterlife? Or will I just cease to exist? This view makes me feel so naive. I wish that I could just accept I'm chilled by the redundancy of thoughts collected but not kept. And maybe I'm still a stupid little boy, too weak to understand or become. No one find peace of mind. Maybe no mind is the answer to that conundrum.
You all to listen to all of these songs in entirety, really good choices. Who sent this one in?
I guess I've seen the thing. I should probably talking to them. So I guess this is another. Okay, so I got this. I love this band. It's one of the bands I found off of Bandcamp. So it's like, you know, a really indie, like hardcore indie single, you know, guy who plays guitar and he's talking about all his breakups. Like very like, you know, something that I was thinking like we could see that because, you know, if I was to write a song, I would totally write about my breakup, you know, like that kind of stuff. I brought this one in because I thought it was a nice comparison to the other piece because I love Kimmy Dawson's like lyrics because I think they have a lot of impact. But I think the presentation, like the video quality, it's not, you know, the most interesting video to watch. And if she had presented her piece with just a still photo or something, I think it would be a lot more interesting, and I would be totally way more interested in publishing that piece. Because this piece kind of seems a little more polished because it's mostly, you could just listen to the MP3 and you could have the same experience. So maybe I kind of want to open up a discussion about, you know, how should we receive music pieces that don't look good maybe because we're seeing a video or a YouTube video that's not, you know, super polished, or it's not just, you know, it's people walking around or it's someone in a coffee house. Like maybe we should discuss, because we have to consider that we see these pieces and have lots of time to review it, but someone who's seeing our journal for the first time may open up a link to the YouTube video and see something that doesn't look classy or like what they think is polished, and they would say, you know, it's not good, they don't want to listen to it. So that's something to consider.
Those are good questions. Oh man, I'm glad I don't have to answer them. Yeah, because you're talking about sort of just production quality, you know, and it's true that the first example looked very homemade, right? You know, the light was not great. Clearly, they did not have Raymond at their disposal in the coffee house. But yeah, but then we have to remember that there are certain kinds of music where, you know, there's a very explicit DIY kind of aesthetic, right? You know, it's supposed to look kind of scratchy and grainy and, you know, cut, paste, whatever. Yeah.
No, I actually really like that you pointed that out again, because that was my biggest issue in comparison with these two. If you check out the first one, it says that it was recorded at a record store, which is cool and all, but when she says things and she curses, people go, ha! Which I think is really rude. Like, I really don't appreciate hearing that, and that's one of my things when I go to concerts and people are sitting there Snapchatting. It's like, for one, you're not going to look at this again because you're not going to be able to hear it, and if you do hear it, you're going to hear yourself singing along. You're not going to, the quality is not very good. So the people that stand there the entire concert and try to film the entire concert, and you know that they're not going to ever watch it again. And I feel like that's kind of, I liked her song, but she lost a lot of it for me because there was like a peanut gallery. And so I almost think that makes it a little bit even more ridiculous, because there are certain things that are drawn more attention to by the people that make a comment or whatever. Like in the case when she cursed, I don't think I would have noticed it as much as the time around when there was some guy in the background going, so I don't know if it would be acceptable to be like, hey, do you think that you could like redo that? Like, that's what I would want. If I were looking at it, like, we're a national journal. Like, I want to be a heavy-hitting national journal. So the questionable sound quality, especially with the miscellaneous comments in the back, I really don't think that I would appreciate publishing. But, like, her song was good. So in that case, do we reach out to the artist and go, hey, do you think that you can
Pre-recorded.
Yeah. So
I don't know. It's for you all to decide.
Okay.
Alright. Well, I think it's just kind of contradictory to the whole consider where all the music comes from. with a professional artist versus a DIY artist. Yes, it may be a national journal, but we have to really be inclusive about what we include. Sometimes they might not have the proper equipment to actually give you something that's professional and polished, and this is all they have, and yet the song is so well done that maybe we should just choose to kind of validate on the song and rather than the quality of, I mean, maybe the sound quality itself, but the peanut gallery. I don't mean to pick on you specifically.
No, I just like that. See, that would, as a viewer, I would stop watching that YouTube video because I don't appreciate. Like, I want to come to my own conclusions. I don't want somebody laughing or whatever. For me, it kind of goes along with sitcoms and laugh tracks. Like, that's why they put laugh tracks in. And I don't know if you guys have ever watched like Friends or something without the laugh track and how weird it is. But it's kind of like that. Like, they're not really letting me come to my own conclusions because they're standing there going, she said shit, that's funny. You know, like, that's not the point, in my opinion. But anyway.
I think there's something to be said for like productions that would have like a low production value, because I'm a big fan of NPR's Tiny Desk concerts, which that's done by National Public Radio Broadcast, and there's people that like the reason why people would record a concert or choose to reproduce like a clip, because it's like people see it as something that can't be reproduced. Like there's a difference between something recorded perfectly and then something done completely like improv, which is kind of the vibe and like sound that she's going for in the first place. So perhaps like when we're thinking about like specific considerations and guidelines to be put like for submissions, maybe there could be like different categories for people who like without Tiny Desk concerts or like live recordings would really like, I don't know, I'd much rather listen to something live with all the like people in the background than a very polished something. So
these are all things to take into consideration.
Thank you. So I definitely agree with what Asha was saying. It is kind of like a distraction, but then it's kind of cool too because that's its organic element. Like there she was in that moment, and it's like something to be appreciated, like real raw. So maybe like when we evaluate if it's so like, I don't know, if it's like super distracting, then maybe it's kind of like we can ask them to do it again. But if it's not so distracting to the message that they're trying to send, then maybe take that into consideration too.
This is like a great discussion, and I know that we're like, we have like no time left, but can we take like just 2 minutes to look at the fourth and final example, the Adele parody, which I thought where that came from.
Oh, I just provided that.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Yeah.
Do you want to do the Adele first or then let it out?
I think. Oh, I don't know.
I think Adele.
Let's
I
do
think
Adele.
Adele has a
Yeah.
relevant
Yeah.
discussion. So funny.
You guys know all this song "Hello," right? Like it's played on so much.
What song? I don't know. You're talking.
Hello, it's me. I've avoided you forever while consuming calories. I love donuts, mac and cheese. They say kale is antioxidants, but I'm anti-leafy greens.
Do you have the point? Do you have the point? Let's
Can you save me?
and it goes on.
I'm in cat.
Yeah. Now, I mean, we all cruise, surf, YouTube, right? We know that this is a whole genre of stuff out there, and some of these parody videos are like brilliant, and the amount of effort people put into them is just like, wow, it's great. The question is, would you accept this for Audeamus, and if so, why? If not, why not? Just real quick to wrap up.
I think it depends on copyright use, because the fair use contract says that you can use parodies. However, if the song is copyrighted, you have to ask for permission from the producer if you're allowed to use the song. Even though you're not actually using the song, you're only using the sound behind the song, or the instrumental part of the song. It's still copyright, so yeah, we have to consider that.
Hi, Raymond. I'm glad this is the case. Another thing I'd like to bring up would be the issue of what's the value of the parody. If it's just a parody done entirely for comedic purposes, there still kind of has to be a reason behind it. If it's just somebody listening to a song and they thought, hey, let's make it hilarious. Yeah. I mean, there's value in Weird Al, but you also have to ask, why is he doing it? Why is anybody really doing a parody of a song? Is there another message they're trying to send? And if it's really devoid of substance, do we really want to submit that into the journal, despite how much effort they put in?
Right, yeah. I think these are in fact some of the key things to discuss. The legality of it, the overall purpose of it. Let's remember that parody often has a very important political purpose in lots of places, right? It sometimes is the only way to say very serious things that can otherwise not be said. So that's the kind of discussion you all would need to have around this table, I guess. Yeah. So great examples. We didn't even get to look at the third one, which was very highly produced from a music student's senior recital at the Berklee College of Music. But I'm sure you can think of other sort of interesting and challenging, sometimes problematic, often beautiful examples. And I hope they're going to be pouring in through the submission process too. So good luck with this. And I'm so glad that you're thinking of doing music in the journal.